The Open Conspiracy. This is a collection of responses from me regarding the idea of the endless war doctrine and the common plan of the control system to bring us to heal perpetually. Thus, I may repeat myself at times, as I hope it will provide for you the gist of the concept that I speak of. The NWO, Zog, is not something invented by internet sleuths. It is a fairly open conspiracy, to be found from the academic works of Bertrand Russell, Norbert Wiener, David Hilbert, and Julian Huxley, to name but a few, and disseminated to the ignorant public via the form of fiction to incrementally familiarise them to the universal aims of this agenda. Wells, Orwell, Aldous Huxley, etc. It is all going according to plan, as we see today. And as Wells and Orwell wrote, of it shall end in seemingly unallied, though they will be, unions, or superstates engaged in a phony perpetual conflict to ensure the two requisite necessities to the longevity of a never-ending totalitarian state are met: ignorance and poverty. Funnily enough, it is a late-stage British Empire doctrine to ensure the maintaining of the said empire and the aristocrats who ran its high living standards and positions. The ignorance criteria has been met. Now all that is required is the poverty. This is why we see the two-fold agitation of a global attritive conflict on the horizon, contrived or otherwise, and the massive spikes in commodity and food prices. It is absolutely no accident that the agents of this agenda, on both false sides, have been engaged in instigating a conflict in an area of the world, Russia and Ukraine, which supplies 30% of the grain and fertilizer to the world, has massive mineral and untapped energy deposits, has a geostrategic significance in terms of being a potential crossroad for conflict, i.e. Ukraine borders many major NATO members in the east, thus conflict spilling over the border is likely, and that Russia supplies the majority of Europe's energy needs, and a vast quantity of the USA's too, though the USA is downplaying this at present. Poverty and ignorance are the main ingredients for their common system. They have the ignorance, and now they need the poverty, hence why this war crisis is in play and the price of everything is going to astronomical levels. $8 per gallon gas in some areas. They want the universalisation of poverty and the final eradication of the middle class. Once poverty and ignorance are fully implemented, then all that is required is to engage in the endless war doctrine that was envisioned at the end of the British Empire in the 1920s as a way to continue the quote-quote noble one's power and ensure a system of binary tyranny, controllable until total prediction can be achieved via full or partial cybernetic transhumanism or automation. That means both Russia and the US are controlled by the same entities, China too, and most of the other powers as well, and their next move shall be to surreptitiously create a pact of limited mutual destruction, i.e. you take out one of our cities killing 50 million or so, and we will do the same. The political expediency thence created from such a catalysing event, like a super Pearl Harbor, if you will ensure the people will be foisted into the Orwellian regime voluntarily. They will do everything required for the war effort. The state will ensure they learn to hate the dissident, the fictitious foe, and this permitted hate will dissipate their spirit of resistance against the state, and thus encourage loyalty to the state through the embrace of animalistic, primal hate at the behest of the state. This is the reason Russia is banning all Western media outlets and social media, and the West likewise doing the same with Russia. They are constructing a system of perpetual conflict, be it a cold or a contrived, or even a hot war. This was tried with the Cold War. but never took off due to the masses being not sufficiently impoverished and ignorant. Thus it was shelved until the conditions could be created to ensure the endless war doctrine's success. Naturally, to maintain the fear. That is why they wish for the prerequisites of poverty and ignorance, you see. They will require false bombings, false flags, bombing their own people, a bit like what the Western-backed state are doing to their own people over there. But the Russians and US have engaged in similar tactics too. Essentially, these quote-quote people, I use the term loosely, now we know they may be something more, with the US ambassador to the UN and her on-screen transformation, shall we say, are insane and wish to either treat us like cattle, to tag us with QR codes and digital branding, to maintain a new global human order, or they will destroy everything and attempt to resign to the dustbin the entire species. They have to be stopped, plain and simple, of course. Orwell wrote, quote, "The war, therefore, if we judge it by the standards of previous wars, is merely an imposture. It is like the battles between certain ruminant animals, whose horns are incapable of hurting one another. But though it is unreal, it is not meaningless. It eats up the surplus of consumable goods, and it helps to preserve the special mental atmosphere that the hierarchical society needs. War, it will be seen, is now a purely internal affair. In the past, the ruling groups of all countries, although they might recognise their common interest, and therefore limit the destructiveness of war, did fight against one another, and the victor always plundered the vanquished. In our own day, they are not fighting against one another at all. The war is waged by each ruling group against its own subjects, and the object of the war is not to make or prevent conquests of territory, but to keep the structure of society intact. The very word war, therefore, has become misleading. It would probably be accurate to say that by becoming continuous, war has ceased to exist. The peculiar pressure that is exerted on human beings between the Neolithic age and the early 20th century has disappeared and has been replaced by something quite different. The effect would be much the same if the three superstates, instead of fighting one another, should agree to live in perpetual peace, each inviolate within its own boundaries. For in that case, each would still be a self-contained universe, freed forever from the sobering influence of external danger. A peace that was truly permanent would be the same as a permanent war. This, although the vast majority of party members understand it only in a shallower sense, is the inner meaning of the party slogan. War is peace, unquote. The endless war doctrine will be put in place. Essentially, they will bring us to a point like in 1984, where poverty and ignorance are championed among the lower orders. The endless attritive struggle, of which will be false, will be entered into by all sides as a means of maintaining the hierarchy of society intact. The war shall be used to justify a total control on thought, speech, privacy, of which there shall be none, etc. You will own nothing and be happy, unquote. Thus we find this as the reason for the closing off of the partisan media on both sides, to create an isolationist and hermetically insular society, to bring inflation and prices of necessities to famine-like levels, and to ensure that ignorance and a jump-on-command society is constantly maintained through ludicrous media messaging, political orders, and confusing popular culture. Also fear. Complete demoralization and detachment of the psyche, that is what will come forth from this all. This is all planned, and both sides have agreed to this ensuing state of affairs. The Western Union, the Oceania, and the Eurasian Pact are coming into view. In fact, the difference between both sides is a misnomer. All are merely shadow puppets projected onto the wall of the cave by the light of the true sequestered power. Two shadow puppets given the illusion of conflict, of whose projection is controlled by the same person. From their hands, and being projected onto the cave wall by a singular light source. Nothing is as it seems. All is illusory, and all we see, upon closer inspection, is but a castle built on a foundation of sand, with a new variation of the disease-inducing villainous entity lurking about now too. As of today, the narrative just got quite interesting. Plus, we see Facebook is allowing hatred of Russians and open calls for assassination of foreign political leaders on their platforms. We can see that the state now condones hatred and seeks to regulate it, right in line with the hate week of Orwell's applied perpetual war doctrine of 1984's grim dystopia. I did a video on this about a week or two ago. Inflation is hitting new highs, poverty being the only contagion of note now, with no panacea for that affliction offered by the state. Strangely enough. No, of course not. Poverty and ignorance are what is required for the institution of the new future, the dystopia without end. People, the lemmings of the contemporary world, follow the absolute contradictory remarks of the state, the confusing cult-like messaging, and go their merry way off the side of the cliff, with glee and a self-assured smile, following them all the way down into that deathly abyss. Do sheep dream? Do they not wish for something more than the confines of the pen, imposed by the farmer, and maintained by the fear collectively induced in the flock with the silhouettes of wolves projected off into the distance by the said farmer? I suspect not, and that is, unfortunately, the most insane part of this entire paradigm we find ourselves a part of. But take solace in the fact that we near the end of this experimentation and torture. Eventually, even the sheep grow weary of the fear, and too much terror makes the flock numb to its effects. In time, the farmer is seen, rightly, as projector of the wolves, and the mutton myth, touted by the once crazed members of the flock, begins to spread in its acceptance amongst the said flock. The rams of the flock become more numerous and more assertive. This does not lead to a tearing down of the confines of the pen. The domesticated love their pens naturally, but leads to a lack of cooperation between the flock and the farmer. Even the sheepdogs have little effect in maintaining order, and eventually, without the sustenance of ever-increasing profits, the farm dies, and the farmer moves on or attempts to cull the herd before his departure. Of course, though I am speaking in metaphorical parables, a false flag of some kind is on the horizon, because more and more of the sheep are beginning to wake up, the rams becoming more furious with the farmer. When will this be? It is anyone's guess at this point, because at this stage of the game, the moves are becoming more and more unpredictable and less rational. It would seem to me they may be playing 4D chess, as many like to remark. However, what we see now with everything, the division, the hatred in society, the blatantly corrupt political puppet class, and the ruling class who care not for the nations of the West, nor their people, are products of democracy. Democracy? We do not possess a democracy, I hear you say. Democracy is what we possess. And believe me, no democracy, throughout recorded history, has been a rule by the people. Typically, in its simplest sense, what it comes down to is a rule by the energetic field of the mob, to which the king, within a democracy, is that political entity to which can best steer and manipulate the said mob. This king, typically, derives from the merchant nobility class, the predatory vultures who see no national boundaries and wish to only squeeze as much personal gain as they can from the general masses, before they are finally exposed and banished. Democracy, thusly, by these above stated traits, always produces internal strife within a nation, rather than external competition against other neighbouring tribes, and will always generate the path of least resistance for the citizenry to then tread down. The citizenry, enamoured by a copiousness of cheap trinkets and decadent entertainment, will always follow the Pied Piper puppet politician into the land of no return. Don't believe me? Look at the citizenry today. You have individuals who are still utterly enthralled with the cult behaviour of the previous crisis of note, and are all too happy to rekindle this behaviour with a continuation of the aforesaid psychotic self-torture. In short, democracy produces the normalisation of insanity and the eventual criminalisation of sanity.